Hiya, here again. So I wonder sometimes whether or not Jesus ever actually managed to just go and do something and nothing happened. Like, did he ever manage to go to the beach and have a nice day at the beach and then just come home? Or go for a walk with his friends and just admire the scenery and admire the view and then come home? I reckon probably that did happen, but probably the reason that it's not, those episodes don't get into the Bible is because nothing happened. But so today we're going to talk about a time when he just got invited round to somebody's house for tea, and stuff happened, as it did so often with Jesus. So this guy called Simon has invited Jesus round to his house for tea. Now there's a few things we need to know about Simon so that we can get this in context. So Simon was a Pharisee. And the Pharisees were some of the Jewish leaders at the time, some of the church leaders, some of the temple leaders. And they were of quite high standing in the community. They would be people that would be looked up to. They would be people that other people would respect and would maybe want to be with and that sort of thing, these Pharisees. And already we're only in kind of Luke chapter 7, if you want to have a look it up in the Bible. We're only in Luke chapter 7, so it's quite early really in Jesus's ministry. You know, he hasn't been around a whole pile of time, but already he's managed to get right up the noses of the Pharisees and the church leaders, and they don't really like him, and they don't really like what he's saying, because as we've said before, he's saying all this revolutionary stuff and he's kind of stirring them up. So you would wonder why Simon the Pharisee was going to invite Jesus round to his house for tea anyway. You would think that it would probably be far more likely that Simon would say, you know, to the people, to his friends, to his group of society, to the people that he liked and the people that he got on with, well, no, that's the last thing I want to do. Just don't worry about this, Jesus. You know, if we ignore him, it will all go away. It'll all blow over. But he does invite him round to tea. And I'm wondering whether one of the reasons that he might invite him round to tea is because he's kind of trying to look to catch Jesus out, trying to look to see Jesus say or do the wrong thing, or something that would incriminate him, or something along those lines, so that actually Simon can then run back to his other Pharisee friends, can run back to his society and say, look, we've got him, you know, he said something wrong. Maybe it's not that, or maybe it's partially that. Maybe it's that Simon actually is interested in what Jesus has got to say and wants to know a little bit more about him. So for whatever reason, Simon puts this invitation to Jesus. But you can see that Simon is really concerned about what people will think about this, because you see, when Jesus arrives at his house, Simon doesn't offer him any of the normal common courtesies that it would be usual to invite, you know, to offer somebody when you invite them round to your house. So, you know, if you invite somebody round these days, you would, you know, invite them, well, you wouldn't invite them round these days, but when we were allowed to invite people round to our houses, you know, they come round, you either give them a hug or you shake their hand and you say, oh, let me take your coat and would you like a drink? You know, that's all just general common courtesy. Well, in these days, it was general common courtesy when somebody came into your house that they would take their shoes off, because it's a horrible, dusty, dirty place. They take their shoes off, you then wash their feet, you give them a kiss, and that's your common courtesy, if you like, done. That's you've shown manners. Simon doesn't do that when Jesus comes round. It becomes clear later on in the story that Simon doesn't do that when Jesus comes round. So he's kind of saying to Jesus, well, okay, you can come in my house, you know, that's okay, I'll let you into my house, but I'm not actually going to be particularly polite to you. You can be here, but don't think that I really want you to be here. And it's quite clever, really, because in doing that, Simon's kind of paying lip service to the crowd of people that love Jesus and are following him and really want him, you know, to succeed. So Simon's kind of saying, well, it's okay, Jesus, you know, come to my house. And he's appeasing that crowd, so they'll think well of Simon. But he's also appeasing the crowd of Pharisees who are saying, what are you doing here anyway? So he's giving himself plenty of opportunity to be able to say to them later on, well, look, I had him round, but really it was only to see if I could trap him. And I didn't, you know, I wasn't polite to him. He was just in my house. Anyway, Jesus comes in and they're reclining at table. They didn't sit down. They used to kind of half lie down to eat their dinner. Indigestion, most tremendous, I would have thought. But anyway, they're kind of reclining at these tables, eating their dinner. And this woman comes into the room. Now, Simon knew who this woman was. And no doubt most of the people around, his friends, knew who this woman was. And if we were going to be polite these days, we would probably say that this woman lived quite a chaotic lifestyle, that she maybe didn't really fit into polite society, that she'd maybe not had the best of luck with the men in her life, whether that was them, you know, not treating her as a person, or maybe her not treating them particularly well. She wasn't somebody that you would invite round for tea. She was somebody that you would probably pass in the street and tut at. She was somebody that at most would give you feelings of pity or scorn or something like that, rather than, you know, anybody that you would really want to be associated with. And she walks into the room and she's carrying this jar of perfume, and she goes over to Jesus and she kneels down at his feet, and she starts crying and she's sobbing and she's weeping. And as she's weeping, the tears out of her eyes are washing the dust and the dirt and the grime off of Jesus's feet. And she's flooding his feet with her tears. And then she takes her hair down and she wipes the tears away from his feet with her hair. And then she opens her jar of this perfumed oil and she pours that onto Jesus's feet. And she's had to work really hard to even get in the room with Jesus. You see, she wasn't the sort of, for a start off, she was a woman, but also she was a woman of dubious background. And so she would never have been able to invite Jesus to her house. And how she actually quite got into Simon's house is a little bit of a mystery. Some commentators say that maybe she got a job as a servant so that she could get there. All she knew was that she wanted to be close to Jesus. All she knew was that she had to get to Jesus. And in doing what she did, she made a huge exhibition of herself. Everyone in the room would have been thinking, what planet are you on? What are you doing? Why are you using this perfume? Why are you sobbing in public? You know, we're just here trying to have our tea and you are making a massive exhibition of yourself. And she doesn't care, because all she wants is to be close to Jesus. Simon is delighted, absolutely delighted. Simon is like, I've got him now. I have got him, because they're saying that he's a prophet. All these people are saying that he's a prophet. Well, if he was a prophet, he would know who this woman was and he wouldn't want to have anything to do with her. So I've got him. So what I can do is I can go back to my friends and I can say, oh, listen, you know, I've got some of the lowdown on Jesus now. This is what Jesus is really like. And obviously his standing and his, you know, his appearance before his friends is going to be great, because he knows something about Jesus that they can then use against them. So Simon thinks he's got it. Simon thinks he's got, you know, got this information about Jesus that he wants. Interestingly, he's thinking this to himself, and Jesus knows what he's thinking. Interesting that, isn't it? We can think things to ourselves, but actually Jesus knows what we're thinking and still loves us. And Jesus says to Simon, Simon, I want to tell you a little story. I want to ask you a little question. He says, there was this money lender, Simon. He said, imagine there's a money lender. He said, and two people owe this money lender money. And one of them owes him 50 quid. And one of them owes him 50 grand. And neither of them can pay back what they owe. So the money lender cancels both the debts and says, it's okay, you're free, you don't owe me anything anymore. He says, Simon, he says, who do you think is going to be the most grateful? Who do you think is going to be the one that loves the money lender's actions the most? And Simon says to him, well, the one that owed the 50 grand, I guess. And Jesus says to him, well, at least you got that right, Simon. At least you got that right. But actually, Simon, when I came into your house, you didn't even show me the common courtesies that you should have showed me. You didn't even so much as chuck me a bowl so I could wash my own feet. But look at this woman. Look at what she's done. She's washed my feet with her own tears. She's wiped my feet with her hair. She's put perfume on me. You didn't even so much as shake my hand and say hello. And because she wanted to be with me more than she cared about anything that anybody else thought about her, she's the one that's going to be able to walk out of here with her past put behind her. And Jesus turns and he says to the woman, you know what, you can go in peace. Your faith has saved you. And your sins, all of your past, are forgiven. In the midst of that, I think there's a hinge. There's just this little phrase in the midst of that. If you read it in Luke chapter 7, Jesus says to Simon, do you see this woman? Because all Simon saw was the external appearance of this woman. All Simon saw was what this woman had allegedly or really done or not done, and what she'd done of her life. But Jesus says, do you see this woman? Jesus sees her. Jesus sees in her that she knows how much she needs Jesus, that she knows how shallow her life has become, that she knows how broken she is, that she knows how nothing that she can try or that she can do is really going to fix this. She knows that she sees Jesus and she wants to be close to Jesus more than she cares about anything else, more than she cares about what people will think of her, more than she cares about the exhibition, if you like, that she knows she's going to make of herself. Jesus sees her and she sees Jesus. And she knows that bringing herself to Jesus will bring her salvation, will save her, will bring her rescue from everything that has gone in the past. You see, on the surface of it, when we look at Simon, on the surface of it, Simon's the one that probably only thinks he owes Jesus 50 quid or thinks he owes God 50 quid, because there's nothing to suggest that Simon wasn't a good bloke. There's nothing to suggest he was horrible. There's nothing to suggest he went around being nasty to people, actually. You know, he was in good standing. He obviously had people that respected him. He had a decent job. He had a decent house. He was willing to share, you know, his meals with people. You know, he had some generosity. He knew probably that he mucked things up occasionally, because that's where the whole temple thing came in. That's where they went. You know, he was one of these temple leaders, and when you mucked it up and when you did do something wrong, it was okay. You just went to the temple with a chicken or a goat or a sheep or whatever it was, and you sacrificed that, and then you were wiped clean and you could carry on. Simon was okay, or he thought he was okay, but actually Simon didn't realise how far into the wilderness he had wandered. Simon had invited salvation round for tea and he didn't notice it. He didn't realise that salvation was in his house. Because Simon was fundamentally, I think, interested in what other people thought of him. He was more interested in what was going on around him than he was interested in seeing anything that Jesus could offer or do for him. I wonder, when we come to us, there's one, this is sounding really cheerful here, but there is one thing that is absolutely common to all of us, and there is one thing that will happen to all of us, even if we manage to beat the Rona at the moment. One day we will all die. You know, there's nothing more certain. What is it they say? There's nothing more certain than death and taxes. Well, you know, the reality is we are all going to die. And I guess we all want to be remembered fondly. I guess we all do want to be remembered fondly. It's really interesting though, isn't it? We're doing, like many people like half the nation at the minute. We're doing a family quiz on a Monday night. We all get together, some family in London, some family all around the country, and we get together and we do this family quiz. And Dan, my husband, who is of a certain generation, he's, you know, in his 70s, and he's doing the quiz this week. So please pray for us Monday night, because I have no idea what the questions will be that he's made up. But he did say he was going to do a music round, and he said something about Frank Sinatra, and maybe doing something on Frank Sinatra, and you know, who was Old Blue Eyes? What do they, you know, who was the guy that was called Old Blue Eyes? You know, well, yeah, I know, and my mum knows. Asked one of the kids, you know, who Old Blue Eyes was, and she was like, what? Who? I have no idea. You know, Frank Sinatra was this revolutionary guy at the time, wasn't he? He was famous for singing and dancing and being in all the musicals, and, you know, everybody. And 3 generations down the road, my daughter doesn't even know what his name is, let alone what his nickname was. You know, my nan, I have really fond memories of my nan. She died when I was quite young, but I have so many fond memories. You know, the boiled egg fairy used to come when I was staying around her house, and I would upend my boiled eggshell when I'd finished it and just wander away, and then 10 minutes later I'd go back and the boiled egg fairy would have left 5p underneath the eggshell. I have really fond memories of my nan. 2 generations down the line, my kids only know her as somebody that I liked, and their children won't know her at all. It boils down to, at best, our whole lives will maybe be remembered as a one-line statement within 2 generations. So maybe within 2 generations, the best we can hope for is that somebody says, oh yeah, Becca, she was quite kind. Or, oh yeah, Dan, he was fair. Or, you know, Fred, yeah, he always helped out when he could. But that's going to be our whole lives, boiled down to maybe 1 sentence, if we're lucky, within 2 generations. I don't think anybody is going to be saying 2 generations down the line, oh mate, do you remember that gorgeous DFS sofa that they got in the sales? Or, oh yeah, they were, you know, they always used to go on such wonderful holidays and have a really nice time. I don't think that's what's going to be important in 2 generations' time. And yet, we, all of us, you know, even Christian, non-Christian, I don't care what you are, all of us care so much about what other people think, and about fitting into our society, and about being a part of what is normal and a part of what is usual, that we base our whole lives around that. You know, it's so hard to get out of that. We all care about our appearance. We all care about what we look like. We all care about wearing, you know, maybe this season's clothes rather than last season's clothes, or whatever it is. But it is so hard to escape that. It is so hard to escape basing your life around what other people think of you. Even though we know, if we're honest, that within a couple of generations, it will all be forgotten. It will all be forgotten. And most of the time we do that because we don't realise that there's another option. We don't realise that there is something better that we can live for. Do you know who won't forget us within 2 generations? Is Jesus. Jesus is the one that knew us, every part of us, inside and out, even before the creation of the world. And Jesus will know us, every part of us, inside and out, right through into eternity. In 2 generations' time, you might be forgotten, but Jesus won't have forgotten you. Jesus is the one that says, I don't care if you think you owe me 50 grand or 50 quid. Sometimes the people that I've met in my life, that I've had the privilege to meet, are the ones that find it easiest to come to Jesus, because through circumstance or through their own doing or through however it's happened, they've got to a place where they know themselves, and actually where coming to Jesus is far more important than what other people think of them. And generally it's because other people don't think very much of them anyway, but they know that Jesus does. There is something in Jesus, there is something in the love that comes from him that cuts through all of that, rubbish. And Jesus's invitation to us is the same today. Whether we think that we owe him 50 quid, or whether we think that actually we owe him 50 grand. Jesus says, I know you. When nobody else knows you, I know you. And Jesus says, I love you. And Jesus says, you are significant to me for all eternity. And all we have to do is care more about getting close to Jesus than we care about what other people might think, or other people might say, or other people might do as a result. And then we too, like that woman who's never named, but I think Luke doesn't name her for her own good, actually, for her own protection. But like that woman that's never named, we can have Jesus say to us, your past is forgotten and forgiven. I love you. I'm gonna give you my peace, because your faith and your trust put in me has saved you. From next Sunday, we're going to be doing a whole church service, hopefully, if it all comes together. So I'll probably pop up and make an appearance in that. That would be great if you're around on Sunday morning. You should be able to catch it, if not on Facebook Live or on YouTube afterwards. But again, if you've got any comments, any thoughts, then get in touch. Let us know how you feel. Take care.